The Celts revered nature, all of nature, and how the whole interactive process works. They seem to be unable to separate out any part of it, even images of their gods and goddesses. Their Hindu cousins did attempt human images, but they were difficult for the Westerners to understand. As we'll explore in another program, the Celts expressed their reverence through more abstract designs, which the scholars call aniconic art. Based on 9th century manuscripts translated by Christian monks, Lady Gregory gives us a description of Mabe's palace, and Andrew Whitman brings this mythological world to life. You are looking at a painting by Irish artist Andrew Whitman, recreating Mabe's palace. This is how Lady Gregory described it. This now was the appearance of Crenash, the royal house of Anil and Mabe, that some call Crenash of poets. There were even divisions in the house with couches in them. The house was made of oak, and the roof was covered with oak shingles. 16 windows with glass there were, and shutters of bronze on them, and a bar of bronze across every shutter. It is time to give you a contextual framework. What has come down to us is in fragments. There are many versions of each legend, with the characters' names having different spellings, and some of the stories having contradictory endings. As you see on the map of Celtic Europe, the ancient Celts were once the dominant race that controlled most of the continent. Today, the Celtic Empire has shrunk to the fringe of the lands they once occupied. Ireland is one of 6 Celtic countries to retain its character, language, and myths. Apart from the geographic perspective, a look at the chart of the Indo-European family of languages places the Celts firmly within its structure. It also demonstrates the cultural and philosophical influence of the East, which is a topic I'll explore in future programs. Let's look at a simplified version of the Irish pantheon. The characters in the bold boxes are the ones we will encounter on this journey. Dagda, known for his cauldron of plenty, representing fecundity, and his club representing war. Dagda, as with his Greek counterpart Zeus, mated with several mortals and immortals, and only Boann is identified as the mother of Onus. The other brothers shown, Lear, Onus, Ogna, and Bulb, do not play roles in this particular story. Little is reported of Mabe's childhood. She comes to us full-grown as goddess and queen. We know she started life in Ulster and had 4 brothers and 4 sisters. According to tradition, her brothers had incestuous relationships with her sister Cathra. There was a plot to overthrow her father, a local chieftain. The plot failed, and her brothers died in battle. After her father's death, Mabe kills her sister Cathra, who was pregnant. The child survives and would live to avenge his mother's death. It is now time to meet our second bard, Michael Roberts, who will have a different perspective on our story.
I know you're particularly interested in Maeve, so I look to concentrate on her story and how it fits into the landscape here. This would be the earliest. This site would be 1,500 years before Newgrange.
Okay.
And Newgrange would be 1,000 to 2,000 years before Stonehenge. And Stonehenge is about the same time as the pyramids of Egypt, just to fit things into a timeline for you. So here, before the pyramids of Egypt, you're talking about 2,500 years. And there may be a connection between here and there. It's not just a stone connection. But even the name Carnac, which is on many of the sites, comes from the Irish word cairn, which means a stone or a pile of stones. And that name has travelled, even outside the English language and certainly outside the Irish language. It's the same word as cairn up in Scotland. That's just a Scots Gaelic way of pronouncing it.
So this site really is we have myths and stories about the site as well?
Yes, but this site doesn't stand on its own. It's part of a regional landscape. It's the central part of a regional landscape, and you need to get to the top of the hill to see the regional landscape and to fit the stories then into context.
All right.
And fits very much with Maeve up on the mountain as to who she was. She was the anti-Maeve, as we called her growing up here, and she has been in the landscape like that. That cairn has been there for about 5,500 years, although Maeve is only associated with it about 2,000 to 2,500 years. So there was somebody else up there, another woman, you'll be glad to hear, but in an even more powerful personage than what Maeve became in later times. But Maeve was a very powerful reflection of her in many ways. Okay, we move on up the hill. It's there today. And they're important at this site here as well. There's a nice story that this was created by the Cailleach, which is the third face of the goddess, the elder woman, the woman of wise years, that she was carrying stones in her apron from the mountain over here, which is the hill of Kesh. And as she flew across here, she was heading for Maeve's mountain, and her apron split and the rocks fell onto the site here. So that's how they were. Effectively what that was a depiction of was the ice sheet carrying the stones with the glacier, coming through the gap up here in the mountains, heading for the sea and melting and dropping all the rocks that you find in this area here. But so that's where the igneous rock came from, and it became a major feature in the construction of the stones here, in the construction of the what we find here on the site. And I'll point out that as we go around a bit more, you'll see them more clearly as we go along. But while we're here, we really should concentrate on Maeve. And Maeve is a powerful figure in the landscape. She was said to be a warrior chieftain of the west of Ireland, and that she would have lived sometimes in what I would call the Celtic period. Not that she was a Celtic person, but within the Celtic period. And that she was a warrior queen. She was a busy woman. She was said to have married all the major chieftains and most of the minor chieftains in the whole country. And the nice story is that they said that the shadow of the man coming towards her fell across the shadow of the man going away from her. So she was a busy woman. It was said that when she died, she was buried standing upright in full battle dress, facing her enemies in the north. But her major husband, Allel, was from the north. So who are these enemies? But it begins to tell you a little bit about who was in the cairn 3,000 years before Maeve. As I said, that cairn is about 5,500 years old. Maeve's story is about 2,500. She married Allel, and the idea of Maeve marrying Allel was that the tribes of the north had been a warring tribe, and the north was associated with war. Ulster associated with war, Munster associated with music, song and dance, Leinster associated with trade and commerce, and the west of Ireland here, where you're standing, was associated with wisdom. And what Maeve was she was the epitome of wisdom. She was the wise woman. She was the Cailleach, the woman who had the experience of the world. And what she had to prove was that she was as good a chief of the people as any man, and she had to prove that by showing her ability to do war. And that's why she went to get the brown bull of Cooley. She wanted a bull that would outdo her husband's bull, but if you see, the bull is the symbol of war. She was showing that she could be as good at war as anybody else. But to reckon to be a really good chieftain, you had to have wisdom, you had to have the ability to do war, you had the ability to do commerce, and the ability to enjoy yourself. And so the four provinces were a mark of that.
How did she end up here?
Well, we'll have to go back to a little bit earlier as to who she actually was. Don't ask me to be sure what name there was on the person who was in the cairn 3,000 years before Maeve. The local name would be depicted in the flowers here. See all the little yellow flowers? The most common colour in the flowers in the landscape here in springtime is yellow, Bui. And so one of the names for the goddess, or a goddess in the earliest times, was Bui or Bree. There's actually a number of families still with that name in the area. And it said that what she was an earth mother. She was the mother who gave life to everything that was in the world. She was married to a man, her major husband, if you like, who was the Dag de Mór, and he's in the cairn on the other side of the town. You see the flat-roofed construction? So Dag de Mór was the great god, or the good god. He was noted for the large club that he carried around, but it really wasn't a club that he carried around. But he was the father of all things in the world. So he was the sky father who met the earth mother, and between the two of them they gave rise to everything that lived in the world. So it was kind of a creation story in that sense as well. But she was said to have, between them they had a son and a daughter. One was the sun and the other was the moon. We don't have other names for them at this stage. But it said that they grew up to be, one to be a druid and the other to be a warrior. It doesn't say whether the male or the female was the druid or the warrior. You argue that one. But in time that the druid overcame the warrior, the wise person overcame the person who settled their business through war, showing that, wisdom and discussion and debate is the better way of solving a problem, not going to war. couldn't learn that in the world today. But in time then, the Druid, when the Druid killed the warrior, dismembered the warrior, used the bones to make the mountains, used the flesh to make the earth, used the blood to make all the water courses, and used the thoughts to make the clouds. So here you've got this creation story, and this is the only creation story that I know of in the very early traditions. There are other stories that are the more national stories that I can recognise as a creation myth, but they haven't been recognised as such by very many people. So Maeve up there was a depiction of this warrior woman, and the warrior woman was the second face of the goddess. The third face was the Cailleach, the wise woman. The second face was the warrior woman. She was a warrior in the sense that she spilled her blood in bringing her children into the world. And her name, Maeve, comes from the old Indo-European language, and it means intoxicating. But not intoxicating with alcohol, but the intoxication that people have with the love of their land. Why people go to war in many cases. And she was the one who would defend her people from anybody who attacked them. And that's who she was facing when she faces north. It was much smaller in there until it was excavated. When the excavation was done, they took away the clay and exposed this feature here, which was known from its views of the inside, but not known in this shape from the outside until then. That's only 5 years ago. But also when they kept digging in there, they went down and found some bones and found some structures, some artifacts, if you like, which suggested that this is a passage tomb. And passage tombs are not just the architecture that's important, but the grave goods that are found in them. That's what determines the tradition, not the structure. Because the structures change radically from here at the beginning of the tradition to the Boyne Valley, which is, if you like, the flowering of the tradition. They were discovered. No, that yellow marking is just a lichen, and it's very difficult to see the markings. You can see some of them here. If you hold that for a second, I'll show you what they look like. And actually, they were discovered by.
Yeah, you don't want to get a shot of this.
Discovered it. Yeah. You won't see it very well now because it shows up when you have breaking light, when the sun is rising, when the sun is setting, when the sun is almost directly overhead. Then the shadows, as such, show a design something like that there. That's a drawing that I've made from observing it over a couple of years. Sometimes
is this one here?
You can see, yeah, you can see them here. You may be able to pick out more of them here, but the light needs to be right before you'll find it. And it looks as though there was a layer of chert. You'll see little bits of it on the stone here. So there's a piece of it here, and that the design was knocked into that chert. And all that's left behind now is the damage that was done to the limestone behind it. But that's roughly the shape that's on it. And it's facing over towards the rising sun.
QueenMedb was also known as the intoxicating one, and as her Greek counterpart Diagnosis, she was also able to take us out of the mortal realm into the immortal one. We have one more bard to meet, Richard Marsh. Richard will take us to a Celtic burial site known as a cairn. It is a cairn similar to the one where QueenMedb is buried at Knocknarea.